Someone placed your soulmate in a position they never expected to face. This was not a simple conversation about love, and it was not casual advice from someone who barely knew the situation. They were told clearly that if they wanted peace, acceptance, and a secure future, they needed to remove you from the picture completely. Your name had become the one subject certain people did not want discussed anymore. They believed enough pressure would finally make your soulmate surrender. They believed the distance between you had already weakened the connection. They believed your soulmate would eventually choose comfort over a love that had survived disappointment, silence, interference, and time. But what happened inside that room was nothing like they expected. Listen carefully, because the most important part of this story is not that someone tried to make your soulmate forget you. The important part is what your soulmate did after hearing the demand. At first, they stayed unusually quiet. Everyone around them mistook that silence for agreement. Someone even started explaining how much easier life would become once your name disappeared from future plans. They talked about family approval, stability, reputation, money, and a completely different life waiting on the other side. They made it sound as though removing you was the final sacrifice required to unlock everything your soulmate had been promised. But while they were speaking, your soulmate was remembering every moment when they had tried to imagine a future without you, and how empty that future had always felt. There was one person in that conversation who pushed harder than everyone else. They said your soulmate had already lost enough time. They told them to stop looking backward. They even suggested cutting off every remaining connection that could lead back to you. Messages, memories, old photographs, mutual friends, everything. They wanted your soulmate to make the separation permanent. And then came the sentence that changed the atmosphere completely: if you choose them, you may lose everything we are offering you. They thought that warning would finally end the debate. Instead, your soulmate looked directly at them and asked one question no one was prepared to answer: and what if everything you're offering means nothing to me without the person I actually wanted beside me? The room went silent. Because suddenly this was no longer about convincing your soulmate to move forward. It became obvious that they had already made a decision inside their heart long before this meeting ever happened. They had tried to be reasonable. They had tried to respect expectations. They had even questioned whether holding on to you was making their life more difficult. But every time they imagined closing that door forever, something inside them refused. They could walk away from an argument. They could walk away from pressure. They could even walk away from people who misunderstood their feelings. But walking away from you permanently was something their heart had never truly agreed to. And this is where the unthinkable choice began. Your soulmate was offered a future that looked perfect from the outside. There was security attached to it. There were people willing to support it. There was even a major opportunity connected to saying yes. All they had to do was accept one condition: never bring you into that future. But instead of accepting, your soulmate pushed something back across the table. Something that represented the life everyone else had chosen for them. Then they said quietly, if the price of this future is pretending they never mattered, I don't want this future. Do not skip what comes next, because that sentence shocked someone in the room who had been hiding a much deeper reason for wanting you gone. Your soulmate believed the pressure was simply about family expectations, but it wasn't. There had been fear behind it from the beginning. Someone knew that if your soulmate ever spoke to you again, a truth from the past could surface, one that would explain why the connection between you had been fought so aggressively. And when your soulmate rejected the offer, that person suddenly became nervous. They interrupted. They tried to end the meeting immediately. But it was already too late. Your soulmate noticed the reaction. They asked why everyone seemed so desperate to keep you out of their life. No one answered directly. So they asked again, this time with more force. What exactly are you afraid I'll discover if I speak to them? That question changed everything. One person looked away. Another person whispered something under their breath. Then someone who had barely spoken during the entire conversation finally said, "You deserve to know why this really started." Your soulmate froze. Because there was something they had never been told. Something connected to the moment your relationship first began falling apart. A decision had been made behind their back. Words had been attributed to you that you may never have spoken. Someone had convinced your soulmate that leaving you was necessary, while someone else had been working just as hard to make you believe your soulmate had already chosen another life. Two people were being pushed apart while each was made to believe the other had stopped fighting. And now your soulmate understands why certain memories never made sense. Why some messages never received answers. Why certain conversations were suddenly cancelled. Why people around them always became uncomfortable whenever your name returned. And why, after all this time, someone was still demanding that you be erased before your soulmate could move forward. Your soulmate stood up from that meeting knowing one thing with absolute certainty: they were no longer willing to build a future based on someone else's version of what happened between you. They would rather lose an opportunity than lose the chance to finally discover the truth. They would rather disappoint the people controlling the story than spend the rest of their life wondering whether you were the person they should have fought harder to keep. But just before they walked out, the quiet person in the room stopped them. They reached into a folder that was never supposed to be opened. Inside was something connected directly to your name. And when your soulmate saw the date written across the top, their expression completely changed, because that document had been created during the exact period when they were told you had chosen to walk away. Now they know someone lied. But they still don't know the worst part. Because on the final page is a name your soulmate never expected to see. And that person may have been controlling your love story from the very beginning. Your soulmate could not take their eyes off that final page. The name written there belonged to someone they had trusted for years, someone who had always acted supportive whenever your relationship was mentioned. This person had comforted your soulmate during the separation. They had encouraged them to move on. They had repeatedly said that you had already made your choice and there was no reason to keep waiting. But now your soulmate was staring at evidence suggesting that same person had been involved long before everything between you collapsed. At first, Your soulmate refused to believe it. They looked at the person holding the folder and asked whether the document was real. The answer came without hesitation. It was real. The dates were real. The signatures were real. And more importantly, there were notes attached to the file showing that certain information about you had been deliberately kept from your soulmate. Something you had attempted to communicate never reached them. Someone had made sure of that. And once your soulmate understood what they were looking at, the pain on their face quickly turned into anger. For years, they had carried one belief, that you had stopped choosing them. That belief had shaped every decision afterward. It influenced relationships, family conversations, and even the future they were preparing to accept. Whenever your soulmate wanted to reach out, someone reminded them of the story they had been told. Whenever they questioned whether the separation had been a mistake, someone quickly shut the conversation down. Your soulmate thought those people were protecting them from another heartbreak. Now they were beginning to understand that some of those people may have been protecting a secret instead. One detail inside the folder hit harder than everything else. There was a reference to a message connected to you. Your soulmate asked where that message was. Nobody answered. They asked again. This time their voice was sharper. Finally, the quiet person admitted that the original message had been removed from the file years earlier. Someone had taken it. Someone who knew exactly what it contained. And according to the notes, that message had arrived before your soulmate made one of the biggest decisions of their life. That realization nearly broke them. Because your soulmate suddenly remembered that period clearly. They remembered waiting for one sign from you. One explanation. One reason to believe the connection had not ended the way everyone claimed. They remembered checking their phone more times than they would ever admit. They remembered wondering why you remained silent. And eventually, they forced themselves to accept that silence as your answer. But now they were being told there may never have been silence at all. There may have been a message. There may have been an explanation. There may have been an attempt from you to stop everything. And someone may have made sure your soulmate never saw it. Your soulmate immediately demanded to know who had taken the original message. This time no one wanted to speak. The room that had been so confident when telling your soulmate to erase you was suddenly filled with nervous faces. That alone told them everything they needed to know. The truth was bigger than one missing document. More than one person had known. Maybe not everyone knew the entire story, but enough people had known something was wrong and stayed silent anyway. Your soulmate looked around the room and said, "You all wanted me to remove them from my future because you were afraid I would discover what you did to my past." No one denied it. And that silence became the confession. But then the person whose name appeared on the final page walked into the room. They had apparently been called after your soulmate rejected the offer. They entered expecting to calm the situation, but the moment they saw the open folder on the table, their face changed. Your soulmate noticed immediately. There was no confusion in their expression. There was recognition. They knew exactly what that folder contained. Your soulmate walked toward them and asked one simple question. Did you keep their message from me? The person tried to avoid the answer. They said the situation had been complicated. They said decisions were made because everyone believed they were doing what was best. They said your soulmate had been vulnerable at the time and needed protection. But your soulmate was no longer interested in excuses. Protection from what? They asked. From knowing that the person I loved was still trying to reach me? That question destroyed the last defense. The person finally admitted that a message from you had arrived. But they still refused to say what it contained. Your soulmate demanded the truth. The person said, if you knew what was in that message, you would have gone back. Your soulmate stared at them and replied, exactly. That one word changed the energy in the room. Because now everyone understood something they had underestimated for years. Your soulmate had never truly wanted to leave you behind. They had only learned to live with what they believed was your decision. And now that belief was collapsing in front of them. The person responsible tried one final time to defend what had happened. They said your relationship had created conflict. They said certain family members believed your soulmate had bigger opportunities ahead. They said you did not fit the future everyone imagined for them. So when the chance came to create distance, someone made the decision that neither of you had been strong enough to make yourselves. Your soulmate became furious, you stole that decision from us. Nobody answered. You decided what our future should be without asking either one of us. Still silence. Then your soulmate asked the question everyone had been afraid of. Where is the message now? For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the person looked toward the folder. There was another sealed section inside. One that had not yet been opened. Your soulmate pulled it out. Their hands were shaking now. On the front was a handwritten note saying the contents were never to be shown unless the truth became impossible to hide. Your soulmate tore it open. Inside was not the original message. It was something even more disturbing. A written summary of what you had apparently tried to say. And the first line changed everything. According to that record, you had not been saying goodbye. You had been asking your soulmate to meet you one final time before making any permanent decision. You had been trying to explain something. Something that could have prevented the separation. Your soulmate had to sit down. For all those years, they believed you had disappeared without fighting. Now they knew you had fought. And someone else had made sure your fight never reached them. Do not skip this next part, because what happened afterward was the moment your soulmate made the choice nobody expected. They looked at the opportunity sitting on the table, the future they had been promised if they agreed to erase you. Then they pushed everything away. They said, I'm done building my life around other people's lies. Someone immediately warned them not to make an emotional decision. Another person reminded them what they could lose financially. Someone else said reconnecting with you could create chaos for the entire family. Your soulmate did not care anymore. They took out their phone. For the first time in a very long time, they searched for the one name they had been told to stop searching for. Yours. And when they found it, they stared at the screen for several seconds. They were afraid. Not because they had stopped loving you, but because they suddenly realized how much time had been stolen. How many years had passed because of one hidden message? How many decisions had been made while both of you were living inside different versions of the same story? Your soulmate was about to contact you when the person responsible suddenly said, "Before you do that, there's something else you need to know." Your soulmate looked up. The person continued, "That wasn't the only message we kept from you." The room went completely still. Because there had been another message. A later one. A message you apparently sent after believing your soulmate had chosen to leave you behind. And unlike the first message, this one had been saved. Someone still had it. But they had hidden it for one terrifying reason. Because inside that second message, you mentioned the name of the person you believed had deliberately separated the two of you. And the name you wrote was not the same name your soulmate had just discovered in the folder, which meant there may have been two people working together. And one of them is still very close to your soulmate today. Your soulmate felt their entire body go cold. One hidden message had already changed everything they believed about the past, but now they were being told there was another one, and this second message could expose someone who had remained close to them all these years. Someone who had listened to their pain. Someone who had watched them struggle to move on. Someone who may have known exactly why the separation happened and still chose to stay silent. Suddenly, every conversation your soulmate had ever had with that person began replaying in their mind. Every time they were told to forget you. Every time they were warned not to reopen old wounds. Every time they were encouraged to accept a future without you. What once sounded like concern now felt completely different. Your soulmate looked directly at the person standing across the room and asked where the second message was. This time there was no hesitation in their voice. They were finished accepting half-truths. They were finished allowing other people to decide how much information they deserved. And most of all, they were finished allowing anyone to use your name as something that needed to be erased. The person tried to explain that revealing everything now could destroy relationships that had existed for years, but your soulmate immediately responded, "Those relationships were built while I was being lied to. If the truth destroys them, then maybe they were never what I thought they were." That sentence landed hard. Nobody in the room expected your soulmate to become this determined. For years, people had counted on their patience. They counted on their willingness to avoid conflict. They knew your soulmate carried deep feelings but often kept those feelings private. So whenever questions about you surfaced, someone would change the subject, dismiss the past, or tell them there was nothing left to discover. But this time your soulmate refused to be redirected. They wanted the second message. They wanted every page, every name, every date, and every detail that had been hidden. Finally, someone admitted that the message had been kept in another location. It had not been destroyed because one person feared that someday the truth would come out and they would need proof of what actually happened. That confession only made your soulmate angrier. Because it meant someone knew all along that what had been done was wrong. They knew there might come a day when questions would be asked. Yet instead of correcting the lie, they protected themselves and allowed you and your soulmate to continue living apart. Your soulmate demanded that the message be brought to them immediately. Minutes later, an old envelope was placed on the table. It looked ordinary, slightly worn around the edges. Nothing about it suggested that it had the power to rewrite years of someone's life. But the moment your soulmate saw your handwriting on the front, they froze. They recognized it. They had seen your handwriting enough times in the past to know it without needing anyone to confirm it. Their fingers trembled as they touched the envelope. This was no longer someone else telling them what you supposedly felt. These were your words. Your choice. Your voice from the past. And for the first time, nobody could translate it for them. Your soulmate opened the envelope slowly. The room became so quiet that every movement sounded louder than it should have. They began reading. At first, their expression showed confusion. Then sadness. Then anger. But after several lines, something changed completely. Tears filled their eyes because the message contained something they had spent years believing they would never hear. You had told them you still loved them. You had told them you did not understand why everything had suddenly changed. You had told them someone had approached you with information that made you believe your soulmate no longer wanted the relationship. And then you wrote the name. The second name. Your soulmate stopped reading. Their face lost all color. Because the person you had named was someone they had spoken to only hours before this meeting. Someone who had recently encouraged them to accept the very future that required removing you. The connection was undeniable. This was not an old misunderstanding that had simply faded with time. Someone was still actively trying to make sure the two of you never compared stories. Even after all these years, the same pressure was continuing. Your soulmate stood up so quickly that the chair behind them nearly fell. They asked, "Where are they?" Nobody answered. Your soulmate asked again. This time someone admitted that the person had known this meeting was happening. In fact, they had helped arrange part of it. They had been one of the strongest voices behind the demand that your soulmate finally remove you from every future plan. And suddenly the reason became painfully clear. If your soulmate chose a future without you, there would be no reason to investigate the past. No reason to reopen old messages. No reason for you and your soulmate to speak honestly about what each had been told. The lie would remain buried forever. But your soulmate had just ruined that plan. They picked up the second message and said, "I want every person involved in this to hear what was written here." Someone warned them that confronting the situation could split the family apart. Your soulmate turned around and replied, "The family was already split the moment people decided they had the right to destroy something that wasn't theirs to control." That was when another secret finally came out. The reason certain people had been so desperate to separate you was not simply because they disliked you. It was connected to a decision involving your soulmate's future at the time. There had been an opportunity, an arrangement, and a promise that depended on your soulmate moving in a direction someone else had already chosen for them. You were seen as the one person strong enough to make your soulmate question that path. You were never the problem. Your influence was, because when your soulmate was with you, they made decisions based on what they actually wanted. They questioned expectations. They talked about building a different life. And certain people were terrified that if your relationship became permanent, they would lose control over the direction your soulmate's life was taking. So they created doubt. They manipulated timing. They blocked communication. They made you believe one story while making your soulmate believe another. And then they waited for heartbreak to finish what their lies had started. But they made one mistake. They underestimated how deeply the connection survived. Even after years apart, your soulmate never completely stopped wondering about you. They may have tried to move forward. They may have smiled in photographs. They may have told people the past was over. But somewhere inside, there had always been one unanswered question: why did something that felt so real end in a way that never made sense? Now they had the answer. It had never ended naturally. It had been interrupted. And your soulmate was no longer willing to protect the people responsible. They took out their phone again. This time, nobody tried to stop them. They opened your contact, but before pressing anything, they read the final paragraph of your old message. That paragraph broke them, because you had written that if they truly wanted a future without you, you would respect it, but you needed to hear that decision directly from them, not through someone else. Your soulmate covered their mouth. Because they had never told you they wanted a future without you, someone else had delivered that message. Someone else had spoken for them. And you had walked away believing those words came from the person you loved. Your soulmate whispered, "They made you think I rejected you." Then came the realization that hurt even more. While you believed you had been rejected, your soulmate believed exactly the same thing about you. Both of you had been grieving a decision neither of you had actually made. Your soulmate could no longer hold back the tears. But beneath the pain, something stronger began to rise. Determination. They said, "I'm going to find them." Someone asked, "Who?" Your soulmate looked at the second name written in your message and replied, "The person who started this." They left the room carrying both messages. The future that had been offered to them remained untouched on the table. They no longer cared about it. Because for the first time, the future they wanted was not being decided by money, family pressure, reputation, or someone else's expectations. It was being decided by truth. And truth was leading them back toward you. But before your soulmate could reach the person named in your message, their phone suddenly rang. They looked at the screen. It was that exact person calling. For a moment, your soulmate simply stared at the name. Then they answered. The voice on the other end sounded nervous. They said, "I heard you opened the folder." Your soulmate replied, "I opened everything." There was a long silence. Then the person said something your soulmate was not prepared to hear. "I didn't do it alone." Your soulmate stopped walking. The person continued, "There was someone else who wanted you two separated even more than I did." Your soulmate asked for the name, but the caller refused. Instead, they said, "Before I tell you, there's something you need to understand. The person you're about to expose is the same person who convinced everyone that you would eventually come back and ruin the future we had planned." Your soulmate became furious. "Who?" Another pause. Then the voice whispered a name. And your soulmate almost dropped the phone. Because this was not some distant relative. Not an old friend. Not someone who had disappeared years ago. This was someone your soulmate still trusted enough to share private details about their life. Someone who already knew they had never fully stopped loving you. And according to the caller, that person has been secretly watching every attempt your soulmate has made to reconnect with you. But the most shocking part had not even been revealed yet. Because this person still has one final piece of evidence. A recording. A recording made on the exact day your soulmate was told that you had chosen to leave. And according to the person on the phone, once your soulmate hears what is on that recording, they will finally know who told the first lie. And why your name had to be removed from their future before the truth could ever reach you both.